Hello and welcome to today's episode of Talking Around the Library Tree from Lancaster University Library. I'm Andy Holgate, I'm the host of today's podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague John Barbrook. Would you like to introduce yourself, John?
Hello, my name's John Barbrook. I'm the content librarian here at Lancaster, dealing with the faculties of science and technology as well as health and medicine.
Welcome, John. So, first question to get us kicked off, and a fairly common one on these podcasts. Can you tell us what your role is and how you can help students?
Okay, so I mainly deal with the content, which is the resources that you use for research and study. So I deal with the purchasing as well as implementation, as well as the support of lots of the databases and resources that you'll use. Often you won't see them because they're always stuck behind our OneSearch system. But they're all there, and I think we manage overall in the whole, all the faculties around about 260 separate resources.
Sounds very interesting. So, following on from that, you mentioned databases. Kind of a little tongue-in-cheek question, really, but I always ask this of librarians: what's your favourite database and why?
Oh, I can't have favourites, unfortunately, so I'm going to have two.
You can have as many as you want, John.
So, my favourite databases are Policy Commons and Overton.io. In fact, I love them so much. I think they mentioned I've almost become like the Overton.io local advertising firm. But there are two grey literature databases. And what they do is they provide access to policy documentation, to grey literature, which is things which aren't traditionally published. The best thing about this is previously we were just doing random Google searches, and that wasn't really very systematic. And the best thing about these are you can now bring a grey literature search into a systematic review, which means it adds so much validity and quality to your work that you can add not just journals and ebooks, but you can also add in things like governmental guidance, really in a very, very systematic way. And so I use them all the time.
That's really good. And I think it's a really good point about grey literature, because I think it's something that students often overlook. They think, we've got to look at books and we've got to look at journal articles. So if you can bring other things in as well. And I know as part of your work and other things you do a lot of work around decolonisation. So is there anything in particular you would advise people that if they want to look at decolonising their work, that would be something to look at?
Oh, absolutely. Grey literature is incredibly key when it comes to decolonising. It was one of the reasons we got it. It was because a lot of the students were talking to us when they were doing systematic reviews, and they said, well, the resources that we want to use in our systematic review, we can't find them. And a lot of those were open access papers or grey literature resources from countries in the global south. And it showed to us that we had a really big need for these resources, and the usage statistics and the amount that they get used, and the amount of times that academics and students go, wow, that's amazing. It's really, really gratifying to show that we can evaluate the need, we can listen to our students, and then we can purchase resources that directly support their research and study.
Okay, cool. That's really good. So changing track slightly now. Always got to ask a librarian this: what's your favourite book, and why has it left an impression on you? And you can have more than one. Several people have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got to keep up with the team. Well, I think the oldest book I've read really is Raft by Stephen Baxter, because that was the first book I ever read in a library. Right. And I remember it, and it's just a very, very, I wouldn't say the most cerebral book in the world, but it's just a science fiction novel. But I read it in a certain place, which was in our local library, which of course is now shut. And I kept going back to read it because I just really like relaxing and reading a book in that library. But they mainly had Mills and Boon. So there were only 3 science fiction novels, and I read them all. But I kept going back, and I read it about 2 or 3 times. I think if I can say the book which I'm well known for recommending is I recommend the works of Ursula Le Guin to pretty much everybody, because I think they've got lots of fantastic relevance today, certainly to do with the fact that they're much more gender neutral in the depiction of men and women in fantasy settings. I did like to read a lot of Conan the Barbarian books when I was younger, and I really like Ursula Le Guin because I realised how refreshing that she was as an author. And I read those nowadays quite a lot. Still, I keep rereading them. And the most recent book I surprisingly have read is something I would never read before, and it's called The End of Sleep by Rowan Somerville. And it's actually a very cliched book. It's all about a drunk Irishman in Cairo looking for the perfect kebab. And it's completely not what I would normally read, but I read it and I keep rereading it. It's just fantastic the way it talks about kebabs. I don't eat kebabs, but and it's just an adventure.
I'm just laughing. I'm trying to imagine the pitch to the publisher on the synopsis of that book. It sounds like that would have been a very interesting pitch meeting. Getting back to the Mills and Boon, as an ex-public librarian who used to look after a small branch library, the Mills and Boon were the most popular books in public libraries. And even one day had a couple of old ladies fighting over the latest Mills and Boon large print that had come into stock. So I totally get that. But yeah, for a young lad, I would imagine that would be very frustrating, just a library full of Mills and Boon. So next question. Imagine you've invented time travel and given your propensity for technology and dabbling with all things flashy and whizzy, that's not out of the realms of possibility. What piece of advice would you give yourself as a student that you've learned as a librarian?
Oof, goodness me. I'm going to have to say, learn to study.
Yeah.
I was a very lazy student, I have to say. I lived and studied in mid Wales. I spent most of my time surfing and mountain biking. Spent very little time studying. In fact, I lived opposite the National Library of Wales, and in my whole years of study, I never actually went in it. I always considered study to be a process towards something. You know, I want to get a job, so therefore I have to study. I did reasonably well, but I didn't really put my all into it. But now I've realised that doing research and doing study, it absolutely underpins everything I do. And so I've got incredibly interested in evidence-based practice and using research and study to kind of evaluate and to influence every step of what I do. And now I feel very, very strange if I do things which aren't evidenced, which haven't got research behind them. And I've realised how important study and research is in actually doing your job every day, not just in order to get that qualification. Okay, so
that's a really good answer. So again, using the time machine, this is a side question to this. If you could go back and re-choose what to study, what in the whole world would you study?
Goodness me. I'd probably go to study cryptocurrency, maybe.
Excellent.
Probably
well, if you could go back and invent it, John, then you could study whatever you wanted, and
Well, the thing is I previously studied computer science.
Yeah.
And as I've often say to people, I do quite like technology, but I'm a terrible computer programmer. In fact, at university, I was gently nudged into library studies because of my ability to crash computers with my code. In fact, I could crash otherwise very stable Linux and Unix machines just by writing simple computer code. So although I can computer programmer, it's not one of my skill sets.
I would say breaking computers is a good skill. I've got plenty of experience at doing that, John, so I get where you're coming from. And final question, and you've already said an unusual one is that you can break any computer, so tell us an unusual fact about yourself.
Oh dear.
Or an interesting fact.
Some people do know this about me and they do laugh, but I once got a job as a fantasy hair model. So I was running a bicycle shop at the time, and a chap came in, bought a bike from me and just says, "You'll be perfect." And I went, "Oh, what for?" And paid me for an afternoon to take photos of me dressed up in armour. I had very long hair at the time. And rather foolishly for a librarian, I signed all my image rights away. And for about 5 years, I kept turning up on the front of books in different heroic poses. I was quite pleased at the time. I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. Look, I'm like the new Conan the Barbarian. But unfortunately, I read the book and it was all about a not traditionally handsome fantasy character. So I was kind of like I was not quite Conan the Librarian. I was more Cohen the Librarian, if you do get that literary reference.
We're going to have to try and source some of these books for the library, John, just, to have them in the archive. So anyway, thank you for joining us today. That was really fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. We hope that you tune into some of our others on Talking Around the Library Tree. Have a good day and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.